Hello everyone, this is Gene and I'm back with another video. I've surprisingly made a lot of videos this week. I did not anticipate that given how busy I've been. Life be funny that way. But I wanted to discuss this article that I came across online on Twitter where Colleen Clickenbeard is interviewed by Megan Peters of comicbook.com to discuss the anime industry's growth and female empowerment. Now, I'm actually not gonna do what I usually do, which would be to go over the article and read it and sort of give my opinions as I read it, because I want to focus more on what's not mentioned in the article than necessarily what the article says itself. But there is a particular section of the article where it talks about types of female characters that I will discuss and give my opinion on at length. But the more I have sort of read this and sort of visited this topic throughout the last day or so, is that this article has actually kind of pissed me off. It's had the same effect on me that like the whole Simu Lu thing did, which is that it's one of those things where it's like you see it initially, you're like, okay, this is silly, blah blah blah, move on, and then you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about it. And then, at least for me, you start realizing the sort of underlying insult that's sort of in there. Now, in the case of Simu Lu, not wanting to sign copies of old Iron Fist comics. For those who are on Twitter, you already know how I feel about that. But for those who maybe don't follow me there or don't like Twitter, I don't blame you. Simu Lu, I believe it was covered in Bleeding Cool, but he is doing autograph signings, for the con scene, normal. But he's made it clear that he's not going to sign any old, like 1970s, 1980s era master Shang-Chi comics, right? I think the full name was like The Hands of Shang-Chi, or the Shang-Chi Master of Kung Fu. I think it's not just called Shang-Chi, but he's basically said he's not going to sign older copies, right? So nothing from the 70s run, nothing from the 80s run, which is over 100 issues, so that's a fair amount of stuff. But he is open to signing copies of more recent versions of Shang-Chi or Shang-Chi, whatever you want to call him. Right. In particular, what's interesting about this is that the older ones that he won't sign were written by white men, and the character of Shang-Chi himself was created by white creators. The more recent comics are written almost exclusively, is the term I was looking for, almost exclusively by Asian men. The only one that I'm aware of, that's the only Shang-Chi issue or comic that I know of that's been written by a non-Asian man that I can think of in recent years, is a few years ago where pro wrestler CM Punk wrote a very odd, and in my opinion very bad, Shang-Chi story. But it's well known among wrestling fans that CM Punk, like many wrestling fans, is a huge comic book fan. So it's probably a matter of him being, famous in a certain medium or genre of entertainment. But outside of him, I haven't heard of any Asian, or rather, I say I haven't heard of any non-Asian person writing for Shang-Chi. So to me, sounds pretty sus and exclusionary that he won't sign the older comics made by white creators, but he will sign newer ones that were worked on by Asian men. I don't know. That sounds pretty problematic to me, right? And I get a similar vibe with this interview, because it's not what Colleen says, it's what she doesn't say. It's what's not mentioned here. Because if you read this article, you'll see for yourself. They go on and on and on. Megan and Colleen go on and on and on about how anime needs to improve and that how it's a male-dominated industry, and so on and so on and so forth. And what frustrates me is that not one mention of Japan or Japanese creators or mangaka is ever mentioned, right? Which, if you're not familiar with anime, right, gives the impression that it's this distinctly American Western thing when it's not. It is fundamentally Japanese. The only reason Colleen and everyone else at Funimation and other voice actors like Wendy Lee, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Vic Mignogna, and many, many, many others have ever had jobs or ever had work is because of the American anime dubbing industry. You don't have an American dubbing industry if you don't have the original Japanese source material that has to be translated into English. Right? So there's no mention in this article of Japanese creators, and they go on and on and on and on about how there needs to be more women, right, and women in positions of power. Let me scroll and show you an example, right? Let me see if I can go down. Scroll. Okay, so let me see. It's anime. Oh, okay. So we have shonen anime is hugely popular in the U.S., but the medium has stories for everyone. Women have had their voices and interests expressed in tons of shoujo, which means young girl. Think of like Sailor Moon, Fruits Basket, that type of thing. And then josei series. Josei is for like older women, right? So you think of stuff like, what was that thing? Gokusen? Something like that. And Gokusen was more or less a great teacher Onizuka, but with a woman. But anyway, um, they talk about not male anime and not female anime and how the anime industry needs to do better. It's like you say the anime industry needs to do better, but you don't mention one Japanese creative. You don't mention Rumiko Takahashi, who's one of the richest women in Japan, one of the most beloved mangaka, who's done shonen, Inuyasha, for example, who's done shoujo and has written basically every genre you could probably think of. No mention of Hiromu Arakawa, whose work Fullmetal Alchemist gave Colleen probably one of her best known roles as Visa Hawkeye, right? But no mention of them at all, right? No mention of them at all. No mention of any element of Japanese culture or the women in Japan who work on this stuff, right? Who work on it as creators, as directors, as voice actresses, right? I read a tweet, I think it was by Oliver Gia, right, who sarcastically mentioned that this article gives the impression that anime is this Californian thing that was started in 2015. He's absolutely correct. It gives absolutely no respect, no mention of its origins and of the women who have been long part of that industry, of that part of Japanese culture. So that really pisses me off, right? You talk about it needs to improve, but you won't even acknowledge where anime comes from. And I know some may say, well, she's just talking about the American side of the industry. And here's the way I view it. She's talking about how anime needs to change. Not how the American dubbing industry needs to change and include more women in higher positions, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But she's talking about how anime needs to change. Anime is fundamentally Japanese. So unless she plans to move to Tokyo and try to impact change there, she needs to respect where it comes from. Even if it has themes or whatnot that maybe don't jive with her as a Western white American woman. But anyway, that's sort of my first part, the part where there's just absolutely no acknowledgement of the country of origin when it comes to this. And the second thing, and it's mentioned here, right? She says here in the middle of this response to this question, the one thing I'd like to see change even more is the treatment of female characters in anime of all genres. Female characters are all too driven by their desire to appeal to men or support men, and too infrequently by their own motives and storylines. They also tend to end up in the background, waiting to be rescued or fixed in some way. I'd like to see more strength in the female characters we see in anime so both girls and boys watching anime as they grow up can find things to admire in those characters, rather than looking to the male leads for inspiration. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule. So, tell me, Colleen, what about this character? What about Riza, who is one of your more famous roles? Is she bad? Is she a bad character because she falls into this definition that you now say is bad because her motivation as a character is wrapped up in a man? In particular, her longtime friend and love interest and supervisor, Roy Mustang? Is she now a bad character because her sole motivation, her sole devotion is Roy? She literally, as I wrote here, she will literally die if she loses him in death, and this series made that clear in the lust battle and in the envy battle that if he dies or she has to kill him, she will take her own life. Does that make her a weak character because her role in the story is to be a support character for a man? What about Winry? She supports Ed now. She literally is the reason why Ed can even walk because she's the one who makes his metal limbs. Is she weak? What about Izumi? Ed and Al's alchemy teacher and martial arts teacher and mentor. She literally empowered those boys by teaching them alchemy and martial arts. She's also, as she says herself, happily a housewife. Literally knocking down doors going, I'm a housewife! Is the fact that she could have been a famous alchemist, but that she chose a quiet life with her husband and tried to start a family with him, does that make her weak? Do female characters in anime and manga not only have value if they are not supporting a man? Because look, I love my Motoko Kusanagis, I love my Integras, I love those, bad, take charge, I am the boss, you do what I say type characters. They are awesome. I have no problem with them. But characters like Riza, the support characters, the emotional support. I can't think of a better term. Right? But the characters who are in the background, as you would put it, Colleen, who push the man forward, right? They're important too. They play an important role as well. What is wrong with a character who happens to be a woman and she's devoted to a man? And her goal, her role in the story is to support him and push him and bring out the best in him. Tell me what is wrong with Riza, because there are 460 people who don't agree with you, and I am one of them. I think Riza's an awesome character. Actually, my favorite Riza scene has nothing to do with Roy. It's actually when she speaks to Ed and she talks about her experience in the Ishval War. Because Ed asked her at one point if she feels like holding a gun is heavy, right? Because he had to use it recently at that point in the story and he was uncomfortable with it. And Riza explains to him quite bluntly that she really can't complain about it anymore because she herself has taken lives. So she doesn't feel like she has the right to complain about bearing the weight of a gun or bearing the weight of the lives that she has taken. But anybody who's read that story or worked on it as a voice actress should know that Riza bears that weight and it haunts her and it impacts who she is. And it's also a huge reason why she believes in Roy, because they both are guilty. They are both blood guilty. And they feel that the only way they can even hope to atone is to try to change the military and try to change the government from within to one that would make peace instead of war. But apparently, because Riza is a support character, apparently to Colleen, there's a problem now, right? So, that's sort of, my my beef with, all of this. Right? Is it so wrong? Come on, move, move, go away. Is it so wrong that there are female characters who are driven by their where the fudge is it? Is it so wrong that there are female characters that are driven by their desire to appeal to men or to support men? Because then you might as well be calling out every woman who ever married a man. Because obviously, why? What's part of the reason why women marry men? Because they want that particular man in their life. They want to appeal to him. They want him to choose her. Right? It's not the only reason, but it's a huge part of it. Right? And usually, women who love the men in their lives want to support them, want to encourage him. But let's let's broaden our horizons a little bit because it's not just anime that has female support characters who are in particular devoted to a man, or as Colleen would put it, are driven by their desire to appeal to men or support men and don't have their own motives or storylines. So let me ask you this, Colleen. What about Sadie Adler? What about Sadie Adler of Red Dead Redemption 2? Because her sole devotion is a man. It's actually a dead man, her husband, who was murdered. The whole point of her story is she's the vengeful widow, and she goes on a bloody crusade to kill the men who killed her husband. Right? Does this make her a poorly written character because her character motivation is wrapped up in her deceased husband? Does this make her bad now that because she doesn't have her own motivation or that her motivation is wrapped up in a man? If the motivation were, say, a woman, her daughter, her mother, her sister, a female friend, a female lover, whatever it is, had the victim that she's avenging been a woman, would she then be an empowered character? Or is she already empowered because she's well written and you can understand her desire for revenge? Or what about Ellie and Abby from The Last of Us Part 2? They're both driven by a desire to avenge a man they loved. In their case, their father/father figure in Ellie's case. Are they? Well, many would say they are. They actually are poorly written characters, but most wouldn't say it's because they are females who are avenging a man or devoted to a particular man in their lives. Most would say that they are poorly written because of Neil Druckmann. But I just want to know, Colleen. I just want to know. Because you don't mention the role of Riza or Full Metal Alchemist at all in this. In fact, let me try to scroll down. Because there's a point. Oh, here we go. She gets. Do you have a female role model in the anime industry, whether it be a character or a colleague? Right, so she mentioned several real world women: Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Lucy Christian, Laura Bailey, who's a very good friend of hers, and then she mentions fictional characters like Hannah and Wolf Children. And here's the thing that I find interesting. This question right here. If you could suggest some female anime characters to look up to, who would you pick? Out of all the roles she's ever had, this is what she picks. She says Sailor Mars is still at the top of my list. I have no complaints there. Sailor Mars is literally the only Sailor Scout that I ever felt remotely related to. Plus, her transformation sequence with the fire is boss. I have to give her that. But she says, again, Hannah in Wolf's Children, Ezra Scarlet in Fairy Tail, Toru Honda in Fruits Basket. There are countless role models you can find depending on what inspires you. You have a point. That is true. However, Colleen, you don't mention Riza? You don't mention Riza. This is... I'm surprised she didn't mention Luffy here. But I guess it's because it specifically states female anime characters. And Luffy is male. But still, out of all the females you've you've voiced. And look, you're entitled to your opinions. I'm not saying you have to like every role. Jesus Christ. I'm not saying that you have to like every character you play, but I do find it interesting that she omits Visa. She doesn't. One second. As I was saying, I find it very, very, very interesting that of all the female characters she could list, that she doesn't mention Riza. Now, here's the thing. To be fair, it could be possible. It could be possible. I don't think it happened, but it could be possible that there was more to this interview than was actually published. But here's what I find interesting. I have not come across anything yet, and believe me, animation Twitter, would be buzzing and sharing her comments if Colleen had any complaints or any opinions that run contrary to what's here. Like if she said something like, I feel like I was misrepresented and this part wasn't conveyed properly, or this was left out and it should have been in, right? If she had any complaints about it, no doubt, and she made them public via Twitter, no doubt Animation Twitter, because she is a well-known voice actress for Funimation, right? That would spread quickly because Animation Twitter would talk about it and spread it around, and then because I follow so many people who like video games and anime and art and all that, I would hear about it without having to look for it. Jesus. Anyhow, I'm gonna have to end the video here because Lord knows I'm gonna be yelled at or yelled for in the next 2 minutes. So, I'm gonna end the video here. I think I've more or less made my point about my contentions about this article. And like I said before, it's less what's said and more what is not said and who is not included. But anyway, please leave your thoughts in the comments and I'll see you around. Bye.